Yeah. So, like I was saying, so this is Pulse Chats. It's I think almost everybody here came from Pulse Speak. So this is more of a more interactive forum where it's mainly for students. I think Pulse Speak was more of bringing external speakers, so it's just us sharing ideas. And I think the purpose here is just increase our awareness of issues affecting the protection of the right to life as as a human right. And I think yeah, the second point is discuss ideas on how the law can improve its protection of the right to life. So I guess everybody here has some idea of what they think should be done in their own way. Is everybody getting me, or am I just talking to myself? Okay, yeah. Because I think why I thought about this topic in particular was xenophobia in South Africa, police killings in the US. And I think xenophobia in South Africa is I think for Nigerians, I think that's even too far away. In Nigeria, it's more. So yeah, I was saying with xenophobia in South Africa, we understand. I think that's for Nigerians, that's even too far away. If we look within Nigeria, we see a lot of jungle justice. People just get bonds without being taken to court over really small things. I think, yeah, theft.
What did you say? Witchcraft. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I think this is the 21st century. I think it's very embarrassing for the society to still reduce itself to such. I think the last one in Nigeria was the four. I think not the last one. The most popular one was the one in Port Harcourt. The four boys that got bombed. Yeah, the other four. I mean, those guys were just like it could have been anybody here. So, I mean, four boys just getting bonds. And xenophobia in South Africa. I love Nigerians got bonds too. I don't know what they have with the fire burning people and all that. So that's what prompted us to do this, and I think we could just share ideas of what we think can push us forward as a continent and globally, because it's not just happening in Africa. In the US, Baltimore killings, and that has to do with the police. So that's even authorities, the government, even partaking in extrajudicial killings. So I think it's something as, not just as Africans, but globally, everybody should take seriously. So that's why we're here.
No, nothing like that will happen in Canada. We'll understand that Canada is one of the G7, so it's not a country where you expect something like that to happen.
So,
yeah, essentially, if we look at the way things are going, and historically, we'll discover that essentially these things have been happening mostly in third world countries, and it all borders on education. It borders on enlightenment. It borders on the system in place by the government to make corrections in the community. It borders on how fast government's response is when it comes to punishing criminals. It borders on many. It borders on how much trust do the people have in the judicial system. Because a good number of times you will discover that most of these jungle justice are carried out because the people don't really trust the system. So, this guy that has committed this heinous crime, instead of we handing him or her over to the government, where if he or she could easily, slide within the cracks and get exonerated, we better do our justice here. So the trust is not there. It's a whole lot of issues, and I think eventually maybe we're gonna get there, but definitely we're not there yet. But there's a lot of issues around that.
Excuse my ignorance, but what is the G7 and why does that now? Why does that mean that you wouldn't see that in Canada?
Oh well, G7 is the great seven, the first 7 countries in the whole world.
Okay.
And basically it borders on their GDP. In a fiscal year, you're looking at Germany, you're looking at UK, US, Canada, Italy, France, but 7 of them that I think that are G7 that are also G12. Okay, and that's one of the groups that's actually G20 as well, that Nigeria is aspiring to belong to. These are they call us third world. Okay, we have first world, so these are first world countries.
Just out of curiosity, where does Holland fall under?
Holland, I think Holland will be between G12 or G20. It's not part of the 7.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not part of the 7. Yeah, Holland is not part of the 7. So these are basically countries that have high GDP per head, compared to the population and things like that. Advanced, yeah, exactly, advanced countries. So what you discover, you can imagine here today, of course, there are killings here today, but what we call the typical jungle justice, I don't think it will typically happen in UK. Mm-hmm. There could be, of course, there could be armed robbery, there could be terrorism and things like that. But not because this guy stole and this guy is a witch and they are putting tires on him or her and burning him. No, it's not. It definitely is not going to happen in the G7 because of the advancement, the enlightenment, the education, and everything. So that's what I'm talking about.
Pulse Chat is a discussion forum for students. You're a doctor now, but you qualify to be here based on your PhD status and all that. Most people here were part of our last event. That's the PAL Speak Conference. Yeah, that you're with most people here were part of that. But PAL Chat is a more interactive forum to have everybody discuss, share their ideas on topical issues that are currently facing not just Africa but the world in general, and how we as prospective lawyers can engage in those issues and move the world forward. Before we start, Paul speak. There's Elizabeth will be the head of discussion. Normally supposed to be a PhD person, but this is our first event, so we didn't have a lot of PhD people come forward. So we're just gonna do this, and our role as the head of discussion is just to give landmarks to direct the discussion. So because a lot of the issues we're dealing with are quite broad, they could be political, social, and all that, but our main focus is our role as lawyers. So we're focusing on the legal aspect of anything. Like the xenophobia in South Africa, you could always think of the issue in different perspectives. And in all honesty, I think the issue even goes deeper as regards politics. But definitely we can't deal with all that. And if we say we want to deal with all that, we're just gonna dig up things we can't even deal with. So we're just focusing on the little we know as lawyers or law students. And to do that, we have certain, how will I put it? No, take it back. We just have like, highlights to show what we will be focusing on, to increase our awareness affecting the protection of human rights in Africa, discuss ideas on how the law can improve its protection, and explore the current status in Africa, Because in Africa, I think now we have an African Charter of Human Rights, but I don't think anybody really knows about it. Because it's not pronounced, and I don't think it's really implemented. So we're just gonna explore that a little bit and all that. Anything you want to say?
I think you've pretty much said everything, and we've sort of done an earlier introduction and the 2 case studies, which is the issue of Freddie Gray and the police custody in Baltimore, which led to the Baltimore crime riots, and the current issue in South Africa.
Okay.
I think we should just start by introducing ourselves.
Okay, I'll start. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm a second-year law student.
I'm Olakomi Oladimeji, and I'm a final year law student.
My name is Ikane Tsukudo. I'm first year law school.
My name is Ajibere Okola. I'm a first year law student. My name is Oge Okola. I'm a first year law student.
My name is Kelly Kwachi and I'm a first year law student.
I'm Vivian Dora, the final year law student.
I'm Daisy. I'm a first year law student.
My name is Sharon. I'm a second year law student.
Ovo Imorademe, postdoctoral researcher. I finished my PhD here last year, but I graduated January this year. I'm pleased to be in this.
Yo.
It's nice to have you.
Yeah, nice to have you all here. So I think we've said everything by way of introduction, but I think we should give a broad overview of xenophobia in South Africa and the police killings in the USA, so that we are all sure everybody has an idea of what has happened in South Africa and in the USA.
In the USA, there was a young man called Freddie Gray, and the issue there was he was arrested, and during his arrest he sustained some severe injuries which led to his death in police custody. And the issue was his post-mortem result came out stating that he had a spinal cord injury, and when you watch the video of his arrest you can actually see how brutal this arrest was. And this raised a lot of issues with the communities, more specifically in Baltimore, which has actually been known as almost a form of a deprived area in America. And this led to the Baltimore riot, which has made it quite an infamous place right now. And it also raised a lot of issues within the laws and the implementations of the laws and due process within the police, which has recently been a prominent issue in America, and that possibly opened most doors into people discussing these issues. And looking into South Africa, with the killings going on in South Africa, a lot of it has been going on for a couple of years, and I think that raises more issues in terms of due process, because I think the last incident was in 2008 till the recent incident that occurred, and it begs a lot of issues even within the African system. The AU, for example, what role they play within due process and what role they should be playing. As it's disappointing that things hasn't changed, and we're having this repetition of total disregard for human life. So firstly, the discussion would be the sanctity of life overall. How can we protect human life from a legal perspective, and how effective can this be within our individual society? And as we look at law goes within everything. Law crosses into our domestic life, our private lives, and social lives and everything. So how can law be more effective in terms of protecting human lives and making sure each individual citizens actually have respect for human lives, and every dispute does not resolve in us feeling like we have this power as individuals to take each other's lives. Any discussion?
Sorry guys, this is so hard to find.
second. We're just we're just starting our discussions now. I've given them a brief introduction of the situation in Baltimore and the recent situation in South Africa, and we're just starting to think about how we can effectively protect human life, how the law can actually protect life more effectively, and how the due process within domestic systems can be more effective in protecting our lives as human, because most of the situations we've looked at, it could pretty much be any of us. I feel like a couple of people just pretty much, especially in South Africa, walked into a really bad situation. And how can the law be of help to the citizens in that sense, both citizens and immigrants within a country?
Yeah, so that just gives us a broad outline. So I think if anybody here has thoughts or opinions regarding the general issue as regards protection of human life as in human rights, I think you should share with us. Mrs. Ovo, not to pick on you, but your opinion here will be
very helpful.
Yeah, will be official.
Well, thank you very much for the honors, but I think I want to listen to the contributions first, and then I'll come in later.
In that case, I'll start you off. So in that case, I'll start you off. Well, I would look from the perspective of the criminal law, because as a matter of fact, this is based on the system, the criminal justice systems, which each individual domestic institution actually has. And I would look at it in terms of how effective can we deter jungle justice, or how effective can we actually deter the police from, failing to go through due process. And you've got someone in custody, they've requested for medical help. What you do is you give them that medical help, because that's the process. However, what we're having is a total disregard to individual human autonomy. And I think the major issue here is, can we effectively actually deter police officers, for example, for just sort of disregarding the law that they're supposed to uphold? And in terms of the normal civilians, like the citizens within a country, can they also be effectively deterred from disregarding their individual human lives? Or is it something which we're going to constantly see that it would occur? One thing I would say is, in terms of deterrence, I think deterrence really has to come from the top, if you think about it. But at the same time, how effective can it be? Because when areas where you see these things happen are normally like the rural areas within the countries, and it's almost like, are they disconnected from the actual system of the law, or what exactly is going on?
Yeah, because just to add to what you've said, I think domestic systems have to, before we get to the international level, because I think every country now claims to respect international human rights, if I should put it in that way. But I think before it gets to the international level, I think on a basic level, there should be a respect for, there should be a domestic respect for human rights, because I think the law as a deterrent serves its function very effectively when it's brought closer to home. And I say this particularly as regards Africa, because I don't think I think human rights is still seen as a Western creation. People still see it as something that comes from the West. Because I remember I don't really know much about the Charlie Hebdo case, but just seeing the reaction of Europe in general to the killing of about 8 people. I mean, just, I mean, I'm not going to say just, I mean, 8 people is, I mean, their life is sacred, but looking at, in comparison to Africa, when, I mean, thousands of people die, and we show disregard. I mean, we might shout for 30 minutes, and after that we get back to our normal lives. So I think it has to be brought closer to home with, I think, domestic laws, first of all. We can't keep depending on, okay, there's an international human rights, and if somebody dies, you see social communities depending on taking the case to the ICJ or taking the case to some international body, when cases like that should be settled in, probably there should be a forum or a body that could handle such cases in Africa or in their domestic communities.
Are we discussing US?
No, we're discussing them together.
Yeah,
It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing, but we're just using them as case studies.
I have a question. Do you think, I like the whole idea of human rights, but do you think it should be internationalized, to use the word? Don't you think the whole idea of human rights should be tailored to, I don't want to say per state or per country, because sometimes I think it's too broad. I know we're speaking legally, but then sometimes I don't think legal issues can be completely devoid from social issues. For example, we shout human rights. I don't think UAE countries or Arab countries particularly are, how do I put it, they're not really happy about the whole, I don't even think they even accept the whole human rights thing, simply because socially or religiously it does not align with what they believe. Human rights, to say respect for body integrity, different things in general, but take it back home in Africa, for example. Some people think beating their children, do you understand, is going too far. But then in Africa, if you impose the whole package of human rights, I support the whole idea of human rights and I believe in it to an extent. But then you can't have a whole body of human rights that is devoid from each country's culture. It won't work. People have to feel like the whole human rights thing, they have to believe in it. It works here at least to an extent because the people believe in it. That's their line of thought. But then in Africa, it's completely different. I think as Africans, we should have a specific, I wouldn't say create, but then our own body of human rights should be tailored to our beliefs and our needs in particular. Because to be honest, our needs are not the same with other countries. So that's why I feel sometimes it just wouldn't work in Africa, to be honest, because it's not for us. I mean, there's some standard principles that should cut across all countries, but then, I really don't think you can separate law from morals and society completely.
Any other thoughts on that? Yeah.
Oh, I have a question for you. So, as a general principle, I agree with what you're saying, but do you have any other examples of, let's say, human rights that you don't believe fit in with African society? Because I don't think the beating one is a very good example.
Okay, for example, let's say Dubai. Well, now we have this thing where rights with women and men, the rights have to be equal. I believe now that is something recognized internationally. There shouldn't be a difference between what a woman can do. In Arab countries, they don't see it that way. Not because they want to, well, some people believe it's suppressive, but then looking back over the years, that has been their culture from time. And trying to foster human rights on that type of country can only lead to conflict because that is not what they have been used to. I completely agree with the whole moving forward internationally and being open-minded and all that, but the law is very, like he said, it's an individual thing. The impact is when it is closer to the people. And if you are trying to foster human rights or equality between the sexes in a system like that, it can only lead to conflict because it just hasn't, it's not how it has been over the years. So long as the basic, there's some standard, like I said, standard things that should cut across all countries, but there are little things that just wouldn't fit into every country, simply because our cultures are different and our beliefs are different. That's all I'm saying. There are many other examples I can't think, but I don't think having a fixed body of rules would work in each and every country, simply because we are different. The same way laws in one country will be different from another country. Even in countries in America, laws in some states are completely different from other states, simply because of the circumstance or the surrounding or the way people react to the laws. I don't know how to.
I agree with you to an extent. The whole idea of human rights, I think, is as you said, fixed body of rules, right? And each country has different laws applicable, right? But I feel as humans, there's this whole idea of divine laws, basically, right? Your right to life, your right to be free from such and all of that. I feel, as you said, basic things like that should cut across all countries and so. But when you look at things that are happening, the case studies, they actually deal with basic rights that should not be tampered with. So I get you, equality and stuff, but then again, bear in mind that as we move forward as the world, not just as Africa or whatever continent, but as we move forward as the world, people will influence each other. So even though Nigeria, for example, has certain beliefs and Zimbabwe has another belief that are in contrast, as we move along, I believe that they will influence each other to somewhat accept.
But that's where I have an issue. Should that influence necessarily be there? That's what. But I think
it's natural.
The difference in each country is what makes each country unique. You can't not foster, but then when you mean influence, I think that would be a natural process. And I don't think human rights is a natural process. When you have a set body of rules, it's not natural anymore. You're kind of fostering it on some people. There are things Nigerians would have thought would never be possible in Nigeria. But over the years, we have come to accept it. Fine. But when you have a set body of rules, I think we all do law here. When you're calling countries to sign a treaty, and sometimes when you don't sign a treaty, you don't have help from certain big countries, Security Council issues. That isn't influence anymore. That is fostering a certain. I don't know how to.
I see where you're coming from, but I think what she's trying to say is, over the years, we should be able to adapt positive law. Almost like if we see value in what other countries are doing in terms of a certain human rights that they've implemented, then there's nothing wrong in us adapting it in another country.
But then is it really positive in our country if it causes conflict? That's my issue. Because it's positive in one country doesn't mean when we import it, it will have the same positive effect in our country. Simply because we are different, we have different beliefs, we have different values.
Okay, I think the first thing, to be honest, is trying to change the mindset of the people in order to be able to adapt to the changing circumstances of the modern time. Because to be honest, if we're so backward and realize these things are not actually applicable in modern times, it's definitely causing a problem. People are more aware, the society, the youth, there's a lot of things in relation to education. People really want to know their rights. It's not before when people were dormant or docile. So you definitely want to, change it. What's new? What's the new thing? Let's try and move forward. Let's not remain in the past. Then you can now bring in the whole new human rights thing. It can't be an imposed thing. It has to be a gradual, systematic process. That's what I feel.
I understand where you're all coming from, but I think based on the case study, we're not dealing with any drastic form of imposition of human rights. Generally, we're dealing with what Aristotle probably would have called general rights, and this sort of rights, some will argue that they're just part of human nature that would just give regard to life. If you picked up my pencil and I got angry, my instant reaction wouldn't be to cause you harm. Do you see what I mean? So with this sort of rights, we're not necessarily taking an obscure, for example, let me give a broader example with the EU, the human rights, ECHR. They want to give prisoners the right to vote, for example. Britain doesn't agree with it, and they've been very sort of stubborn towards adopting it into their domestic law. That would be something I would say maybe a little bit imposing if we say everybody has to give prisoners rights to vote. But here we're talking about basic things you would expect. You know, you don't have to be educated to understand that killing is wrong, if you see where I'm coming from. You don't need an advanced level of education. I mean, a 6 years old will understand that, you know, someone dying is such a big deal that it's so irreversible, which is what's significant about life, is the fact that you're taking away so much. So when it comes to sanctity and respecting life, how can countries move forward? How can we enforce this sanctity of life on people so that it governs their everyday living and they don't do something drastic that affects someone else's life? And one person's life is something. Once someone is gone, it affects so many other people. I think we need to come and focus on that point.
Coming from what you said, because I looked at both scenarios, so case studies, you're looking at US and South Africa, and it's quite interesting that South Africans, or the issue that occurred in South Africa rather, was incited to make the people embark on what they did, as opposed to the US where the people reacted to the law.
That's right.
So in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong though, but in South Africa, I felt like the leader did not take responsibility, because it was the Zulu leader that actually incited the people to do it. And if you want the law to actually be stamped on in your domestic society before even going international, you need to come out and say, okay, I'm taking responsibility, or we as a state are taking responsibility. That alone kind of, if I'm Nigerian, right, and my president comes and tells the international community, we are taking responsibility for what has occurred. As human, as Nigerian, I'm expected to like, okay, this is wrong, right? Well, in South Africa, my argument is that the government did not effectively start to take responsibility. It was more of comparing laws here and there, comparing countries here and there, as opposed to coming out, and that affects the implementation of the law within the domestic society. But if you look at the US, it's more like the law is there, right? But it's the implementation that was off, if I would say. So it's like, I don't know, it's just like, for me, the US, I think it was fine, laws there, it's just that the implementation was wrong, so it had to deal with how it was to be implemented, as opposed to South Africa, where the law wasn't even there in the sense that there was no responsibility to assume. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, but in the perspective of the law, it's very interesting to know, in terms of human rights and constitution, South Africa was seen as possibly one of the most advanced constitutions in Africa in terms of the protection of human rights. So I would say, to an extent, we can argue that yes, they do have the law protecting people, but they also lack an implementation. However, the difference within the US and South Africa, for example, would probably be how effective the response was, because we do know that the policemen involved in Freddie Gray's arrest and who were involved in the whole incident were prosecuted. I'm not sure what the outcome of that was, but I am aware that they were prosecuted. However, in South Africa, I guess the issue then goes that if something is to do with a mass majority, how can we then enforce the law? It's easier if I know that you killed someone, you're responsible. We all know what to point fingers at. But if it's more than one person, if it's a community, for example, and then what do we start pointing fingers at? We could say, yes, the president is his country's responsible, but like I said earlier, some areas within a country are far remote from the actual government at the top. So how do we close that gap and make them part of one society so that they can respect the same laws everyone is being governed by? Because if not, what we get is this has a larger effect on not just, the immigrants in there, that casually leaving there. You know, even students have been victims of these killings, which is quite a shame, to be fair.
I think he said a lot of important things, but it's also important to note that it wasn't in a rural area where the xenophobic attacks were happening, and so we can't say that these are isolated incidents that just a few people in some rural communities are engaging in. I think it's a much bigger problem than that, and we have to look at the whole situation and the whole socioeconomic problem in South Africa. And it's not an excuse, but I think South Africa has some deeper political and social issues that we might want to address in this conversation as well, to give it more.
I would say, well, if we look at the history of South Africa, maybe then we start to understand the scale of what exactly is going on. Well, South Africa, well, you know, coming from the apartheid periods where the black communities have felt isolated and felt very deprived, and what we've ended up with is a generation of uneducated people talking about the black community, because the white community has always been the thriving community who've had access to education. So what we're left with now is a big scale of the what I would call almost the unfortunate generation, because they've literally had no access to a decent education. They've suffered through the apartheid time. Nelson Mandela did do a lot of work to bring the people out of that, but I believe even at the point they are now, the issue now is, yes, the country's trying to move forward, but if you have a big chunk of your society that are uneducated, and which means they can't take up jobs, even though there's so many jobs in South Africa, which is why you get a lot of migrants coming into the country to take up these jobs. But if you're uneducated and you're unqualified for a job, I can't employ you. You know, it's really hard for an employer, because at the end of the day, the whole point of a job and a business is for the, you know, organization to thrive and succeed. But if you have no clue what I'm dealing with, I can't employ you. So what you have is almost like, you can understand why the migrants are the easy scapegoat in the situation, coming from the, you know, the community, because it's you turn right, you turn left, the reality is it is immigrants that are working. Well, the white South Africans are working too, because they're educated, but that's what they see, if you see where I'm coming from. And it's gotten to the extent, even little petty trades, like someone having a little shop selling something, hairdressing salons, are being owned by immigrants. So this perhaps gives you a little bit more of an understanding on the background of what's really going on in South Africa. But I feel like the major issue, despite the background, is just, is this enough to justify this total regard to life?
I think based on what you said, to me it's kind of clear that then the law actually plays a subsidiary role. The problem is not with the law itself, but then, like she said, with the deeper rooted issues, because tomorrow you could create a body of laws that, you know, are meant to solve the problem. But we have to remember that the laws are they are meant to impact individuals. And when it comes to feelings, like you said, they are not thinking about the law. They are upset. They are frustrated. So the law, in reality, does, in many issues, to be honest, plays a subsidiary role, because we are individuals, we are human beings, and we act based on our feelings and our surroundings. When people are committing crimes, most of the time they're not thinking of the law. It's based on what they need at that point in time and how they feel. So with South Africa, even with many of the killings in America with Black Lives Matter, and like you said, the law is there, but then the issue is with the society itself and what they feel and what they think. And if the law is meant to be a deterrent as such, then ideally these killings shouldn't be there. But then it goes on. So I think it's the issue really with the law. That's how I feel.
Can I come in? I don't know where to start, whether from the local and the international level, but I like to first of all say, what is human rights? How do we define human rights?
I think from basic level, the human rights is just a respect for basic needs of every human being. That's right to life, right to freedom, right to association. I mean, everything that makes you human, that makes you enjoy life, and gives you dignity as a person, will be what will be human, will be regarded as human rights.
So, does anyone want to add to that or differ from that?
Okay. I pretty much agree with that. I think they're a set of unalienable rights which each person is entitled to by virtue of just being a human being.
Given to you literally at birth, that if I respect and you respect, we could have like a good society.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's, I think, where I want to say it from. We're talking about ensuring the sanctity of life. And the first of them is the right to life. And so if we see human right as a right that accrues to every human just because he is human, then that human right is universal. So in 1948, when the United Nations came up with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the whole world, it was something that everyone embraced because the UN had just been formed in 1945 after the League of Nations collapsed. And then in 1945, the UN came up, and their objective was to make sure that all over the world, people are seen as humans, and they are given the opportunity to enjoy that, that thing of being human. It's not something that is given to you. It's not something that can be taken from you. So it is their rights or their bodies of rights that a person enjoys just because the person is human, wherever you are on the globe, regardless. So if we take it from there, then I want to also talk about the fact that if we say human rights are rights that we have and we should enjoy just because we're humans. So if I go to Saudi Arabia, for example, I go to any of the Arab countries, I should be able to enjoy those rights regardless of where I'm at the time. Now, why don't we see that happening? I'm trying to ask if you, because we're talking quite generally now, and then what keeps coming to my mind is what happens to the values that we have as humans. Why should a set of people just wake up in the morning and all they want to do is to kill? If you're frustrated because, you've had a history, and you're frustrated because you've not been able to access education, or your children can't access food and all that, whose fault? And if it's the fault of a government that had long passed, maybe 10, 100 of years ago, why do you want to vent that anger on someone else to kill? So a lot of these things, they are so large that if we want to begin to talk about them, it will take a lifetime. But starting point is realizing that these rights are bodies of rights that are recognized everywhere. Wherever you are human, and so you should enjoy those rights. It cannot be taken from you, and no, except you want to on your own volition, maybe cases of suicide and all that. But societies, both in Africa and everywhere in the world, are evolving. So talking about what Sean mentioned about how some rights cannot fit into certain societies, I do not really agree, because society is advancing, society is evolving, so we cannot keep holding to our culture and say this is how things are done, this is our belief. And so because this is our belief, we don't want to receive the movement, the development, because the world has become a global village. Back in Nigeria, I used to teach, and I teach international law and property law. And in property law, I teach the law of inheritance. There is this part of Nigeria, I don't know whether we are all from Nigeria, but there's this part of Nigeria that is called Onitsha. They have this law or this culture that where a man has all female children and does not have a male child, when the man dies, none of the female children would have access to his property. So, for example, a man has thousands and millions of property, both real and whatever, and then the man dies, and he has maybe 7 children, and they're all girls. The girls do not have access to those things. Why? Now, there is this procedure by which if a man wants any of the daughters to inherit his property after death, he would have to perform what they call the Nrachi ceremony. The Nrachi ceremony is a process by which one of the daughters of that man would elect not to get married and remain in the father's house for life. So that the ceremony is performed while the man is alive. And then the girl is brought forward. They bring kind of different things, kola nuts, golds and all that, and palm wine. And then they do the ceremony. And then virtually making that girl remain in the father's house forever. And that is the only way the father's estate could devolve on the female child, that particular female child. And then the female child will have the option of sharing with the sisters. If that is not done, the man dies, the man's property goes to the brother. Now, we're talking about evolving society. Is that a society that we want to perpetuate to the next generation? So these are things that we should think about in broader terms and begin to see how the law can actually influence our culture for the better. In year 2000, we saw states in northern Nigeria declaring the Sharia state, starting from Zamfara, Zamfara state, and then is it Ahmed Yerima? He was the first who declared Sharia law, and then 12 other states declared Sharia law. And you know what happened? Several people were discriminated against. You couldn't even enter the same bus with men and women together. There were segregations. But how do you live in a society like that? Do you get what I mean? So what I'm trying to say is the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, 1948, is a universal declaration, and it's something that all nations have signed up to. And every nation in the world, both African nations, are part of that. So no one, fine, there are some UN or some conventions that have come out and it's like people were cajoled, or African states were cajoled into signing them, but these are basic rights we're talking about. So what I think we should think about as lawyers, how we can influence society, is, like you said, awareness, education, talking about these things. These are rights that you have, that are in you, regardless of who you are, where you are at the time. And so people should be aware. I did a seminar some time back, and I just told people, I said, do you know the same way we're gathered here talking about how we can be more aware of these rights and how we can protect them? There are people who are born, right from day one, they are being taught how to kill. They don't go to any formal school to learn A or B. All they are being taught right from day one as they are born is how to kill. So what we can do in our little way is just begin to talk about the values of life. Back home in Nigeria, we kind of want to celebrate death rather than life. When a person dies, you see there's so much ceremonies and everything that goes into it. While the person is alive, you don't ever hear about them. You don't know them. So, like, going back to the topic, how do we ensure the sanctity of life? Preaching the message. What's happened in South Africa is pathetic, but that may not just be the last of it.
That's right, because it's not the first
Yeah,
incident.
it's not even the first. But how can you keep talking about frustration of years back, and whether you're not, you have access to education, you have access to basic things of life, and then the result of the frustration is other several people being killed? So it's quite a broad topic, but I thought we should like bring it back home and talk about the values of the human life, because that's where it all starts from. What do we celebrate? And do we celebrate people just because they've got plenty of cars, money, houses, and all that? Do we celebrate people because they've got a lot to impact to society?